In the shadows of a dimly lit interrogation room, the air thickens with tension. A young man in his late 20s, of Middle Eastern descent, with dark hair and deep-set brown eyes, sits nervously at a metal table. He is unaware that his words are about to be twisted into a narrative that serves a greater purpose. Confessions, once a personal admission of guilt, morph into instruments of power. They validate arrests and justify punishments, transforming the law into a stage where truth is merely a prop. The system thrives on certainty, often at the expense of justice. As the young man sits, he contemplates the weight of his own innocence. Outside, the world spins on, oblivious to the quiet horror unfolding within these walls. The pressure to confess looms like a storm cloud, ready to burst. The interrogation process is designed to extract confessions, often through coercion. Investigators wield their authority like a weapon, manipulating fear and uncertainty to mold a narrative that fits their needs. The truth becomes secondary. In this theater of the absurd, innocence is irrelevant. Once a confession becomes the objective, the truth is discarded. The young man's fate hangs in the balance, dictated by the whims of those who seek closure. The system thrives on the illusion of certainty. A signed confession, no matter how extracted, becomes a reusable tool. It validates the actions of law enforcement, providing a neat resolution to messy realities. As the young man's resolve weakens, he realizes that the narrative being crafted is not his own. It is a story that serves the institution, one that prefers a finished tale over an accurate account of events. The pressure intensifies and the lines between guilt and innocence blur. The young man is no longer just a suspect. He is a pawn in a larger game, where the truth is malleable and easily reshaped. The audience, comprised of society at large, craves resolution. They demand answers, often overlooking the murky waters of justice. In this environment, forced confessions become a quick fix, a way to restore order. As the clock ticks on, the young man grapples with the choice before him. To confess is to escape the immediate nightmare, but at what cost? The walls close in, and the stakes rise. In this system, the act of confession becomes a performance, scripted and rehearsed. The young man is caught in a web where his own voice may be used against him, reshaping his identity. The theater of law demands a conclusion, and the young man's fate is being written without his consent. The pressure mounts, and the truth becomes a casualty in the pursuit of certainty. As the interrogation continues, the young man's understanding of truth shifts. He begins to question whether his own voice can be trusted, or if it will be twisted into something unrecognizable. What happens when the institutions of power can manufacture truth? As the young man contemplates his next move, the chilling reality sets in. Once the story is written, can it ever be rewritten? In the shadow of political turmoil, leaders faced mounting pressure to deliver swift resolutions. The public clamored for answers, demanding reassurance in a world filled with anxiety and fear. In this climate, the need for certainty overshadowed the pursuit of truth, leading institutions to prioritize confessions over justice. Investigators, driven by the urgency of their superiors, began to view confessions as the quickest route to closure. Each signed statement became a badge of success, regardless of the truth behind it. The pressure to produce results transformed the investigative process into a race against time. As fear spread through communities, the definition of guilt began to shift. Individuals were increasingly seen as potential threats, and their associations scrutinized for evidence of wrongdoing. The innocent became entangled in webs of suspicion, their lives upended by the relentless search for a scapegoat. With each passing day, the stakes grew higher. Authorities justified their methods, claiming that swift action was necessary to maintain order. The narrative shifted. Uncertainty became synonymous with danger, and any semblance of ambiguity was labeled a threat to national security. The public's demand for clarity intensified, and media outlets fueled the frenzy, sensationalizing arrests and confessions. Each headline promised resolution, yet obscured the complexities of the truth. In this environment, the line between fact and fiction blurred, as narratives were crafted to fit the needs of the moment. As the pressure mounted, interrogators adopted increasingly aggressive tactics. Fear became a tool wielded to extract confessions that would satisfy the insatiable appetite for certainty. Suspects were isolated, their voices drowned out by the clamor for immediate answers. In this climate of urgency, the concept of justice began to erode. The public's trust in the system waned as they witnessed the consequences of coerced confessions. Innocent lives were shattered, yet the machinery of enforcement continued to churn, driven by the need for results. Communities began to fracture under the weight of suspicion. Neighbors turned against one another, and the fear of being implicated silenced dissent. The once vibrant fabric of society grew frayed as uncertainty cast a long shadow over everyday life. The cycle of fear and confession perpetuated itself, as each coerced admission led to more investigations and accusations. The system thrived on the chaos it created, feeding off the very uncertainty it claimed to combat. Each confession became a thread in a tapestry of lies. As the pressure to deliver results intensified, the consequences of forced confessions became more pronounced. Families were torn apart, and lives were irrevocably altered. The quest for certainty had transformed into a hunt for scapegoats, where innocence was no shield. In this world of manufactured certainty, the authorities learned to fear ambiguity more than injustice. Each confession, regardless of its truth, provided a temporary balm for societal unrest, allowing leaders to project control amidst chaos. As the narrative of fear took hold, the system reinforced the idea that a confession was the ultimate proof of guilt. Investigators, pressured to deliver results, began to view the truth as secondary to the appearance of resolution. In this environment, the innocent were often caught in a web of suspicion, their lives turned upside down by the relentless pursuit of answers. The system's need for closure overshadowed the fundamental principles of justice, leaving many to suffer in silence. As the act draws to a close, the consequences of this relentless pursuit of certainty become clear. The search for answers has created a landscape where truth is malleable, and the innocent are left to navigate a world shaped by fear and suspicion. In the dimly lit interrogation room, the air thick with tension, officials framed coercion as a necessary evil. They believed that a confession, however obtained, was the quickest route to restore order, a solution disguised as procedure. As the hours dragged on, the pressure mounted. Investigators, armed with the belief that urgency justified their methods, shifted from seeking truth to crafting statements. The goal was no longer clarity, but closure. The suspect, a young man in his late 20s with dark hair and a weary expression, felt the weight of expectation. Each question felt like a trap, each silence a signal to confess, as the walls closed in around him. In this environment, denial became a form of resistance. Investigators interpreted every refusal as proof of guilt, further tightening the noose of coercion. The narrative was already set. The truth was secondary. With each passing minute, the young man's resolve weakened. The officials justified their tactics as compassionate, claiming it was better to extract a confession than risk the chaos of uncertainty that loomed outside. The interrogation transformed into a negotiation, but one with only one acceptable outcome. The young man was led to believe that surrendering his truth would bring an end to his suffering, a false promise cloaked in urgency. As the coercion intensified, the lines between right and wrong blurred. Officials learned that a signed confession shielded them from accountability, allowing them to sidestep the moral implications of their actions. The young man, now exhausted and disheveled, began to see the confession not as a betrayal, but as a means of escape. The promise of relief became more enticing than the truth he clung to. As the hours turned into a relentless cycle of questioning and pressure, the young man's identity began to dissolve. He was no longer a person, but a potential statistic, a name on a document waiting to be signed. In this grim theater of coercion, the truth became an obstacle rather than a goal. The system thrived on the illusion of certainty, where the document mattered more than the reality it claimed to represent. The young man finally succumbed to the pressure, his voice trembling as he recited the words crafted by his interrogators. In that moment, he became both the author and the victim of his own false narrative. Once the confession was signed, it became a weapon for the authorities. They could now justify their actions, deflect blame, and present a neatly packaged story to the public, regardless of its truth. The young man, now marked by the system, faced an uncertain future. The confession, a document of coercion, would follow him, shaping his identity and sealing his fate, long after the interrogation ended. In the aftermath, the institutions reveled in their perceived efficiency, blind to the moral decay that festered beneath. The cycle of coercion continued, with the promise of closure overshadowing the pursuit of truth. In a climate of suspicion, innocence becomes a liability. Those with connections to the accused find themselves under scrutiny, where mere proximity can transform them into suspects. Rumors spread like wildfire, and the line between guilt and association blurs. A community once united now fractures under the weight of fear, as whispers turn into accusations, and the innocent are ensnared by the very ties that once bound them. Investigators, pressured to produce results, begin to see denial as an act of defiance rather than a plea for justice. Innocent individuals like Elena, a middle-aged woman with dark brown hair and deep-set green eyes, find themselves caught in a web of suspicion. Her attempts to defend her husband only deepen the authorities' resolve to extract a confession, as they interpret her loyalty as resistance. As the investigation unfolds, the authorities categorize individuals into convenient labels: dissenters, outsiders, and the unlucky. These classifications strip away their identities, reducing them to mere statistics in a growing case. The more they resist, the more evidence is manufactured against them, as the system thrives on the need for a narrative that fits its agenda. The authorities begin to target those who share social ties with the accused, believing that guilt can be inherited through association. Friends and family members are pulled into the fray, their lives disrupted as they are interrogated and pressured to confess to crimes they did not commit. The system's appetite for confessions grows, and the innocent suffer the consequences. In this environment, even the slightest hint of dissent is met with hostility. The authorities view any refusal to comply as a challenge to their authority. The pressure mounts, and the innocent are left with a stark choice: submit to the narrative being forced upon them or face the consequences of their defiance. The stakes are high, and the cost of silence becomes unbearable. Elena's husband, once a respected member of the community, now finds himself trapped in a cycle of coercion. As the days drag on, his physical appearance deteriorates, his face gaunt, eyes hollow, and clothes disheveled. The toll of isolation and fear weighs heavily on him, as he grapples with the impossible choice of confessing to a crime he did not commit. As the authorities continue their relentless pursuit of confessions, they employ tactics designed to break the will of the innocent. Isolation becomes a weapon, as suspects are kept in solitary confinement, deprived of human contact. The silence amplifies their fears, pushing them closer to the brink of capitulation as they yearn for any form of relief from their torment. The pressure intensifies as investigators resort to manipulation, promising leniency in exchange for compliance. They craft narratives that twist the truth, presenting false choices to the innocent. The lines between right and wrong blur, and the system's demands become increasingly unreasonable, forcing individuals to confront the grim reality of their situation. Elena, desperate to save her husband, becomes embroiled in the system's machinations. She learns that her own connections can be weaponized against her. The authorities turn her relationships into evidence, suggesting that her loyalty is a sign of guilt. The very fabric of trust within her community begins to unravel as fear takes hold. As the weeks pass, the innocent become increasingly aware of their precarious positions. The system has no need for truth. It requires individuals to bear the weight of fabricated confessions. The pressure mounts, and the once clear distinctions between guilt and innocence dissolve. The innocent are now suspects, ensnared in a web of lies. The authorities, fueled by their need for closure, begin to piece together a narrative that fits their agenda. They manipulate evidence and twist testimonies, creating a false reality that serves their interests. The machine of coercion churns on, indifferent to the lives it destroys in its wake. As the innocent are drawn deeper into the system, they find themselves trapped in a cycle of despair. Their identities are erased, replaced by labels that define them as suspects. The weight of these accusations bears down, and the struggle for truth becomes a fight against an overwhelming machine of injustice. In this grim landscape, The innocent are left to navigate a system that thrives on their vulnerability. The pressure to confess becomes a relentless force, and the struggle for truth is overshadowed by the machinery of coercion. As the act unfolds, the question remains, how many more lives will be caught in the web of forced confessions? In the dim light of a cramped interrogation room, a young man named Amir, with dark hair and weary brown eyes, sits slumped in a metal chair. The air is thick with tension, and the weight of silence presses down as he contemplates the mounting pressure around him. As hours stretch into an agonizing silence, Amir feels the isolation seep into his bones. The door remains shut, and the muffled sounds of distant voices echo like a reminder of the world he has been cut off from. The interrogators return, their faces a mask of authority. They wield threats like weapons, promising relief if Amir simply admits to the accusations against him. Each word is a calculated move designed to manipulate his fear into compliance. Amir's mind races as they present him with a script of confessions, rehearsing the lines until they feel familiar. The words, once foreign, begin to take root in his memory, reshaping his reality under duress. Days blur together in the stifling room, and the promise of freedom becomes a haunting refrain. Each time he resists, the interrogators escalate their tactics, further entrenching him in despair and hopelessness. With each repetition of the script, Amir's resolve weakens. The lines he once rejected now seem like a lifeline, a way to escape the relentless cycle of isolation and fear that binds him. The interrogators watch closely, their expressions betraying a mix of impatience and anticipation. They know that once Amir utters the words they want to hear, the ordeal will finally come to an end. In a moment of surrender, Amir finally acquiesces, reciting the confession with a hollow sense of relief. The words flow from his lips, no longer his own, but a product of coercion and fear. As the confession is documented, Amir feels a strange emptiness wash over him. The release he sought comes at the cost of his truth, leaving him to grapple with the weight of his own words. With the confession signed, Amir is led away, his spirit crushed. The walls that once confined him now feel like a prison of his own making, as he contemplates the irreversible nature of his words. The system has claimed another victim. In the wake of Amir's confession, the authorities celebrate a swift resolution, unaware or indifferent to the truth that has been sacrificed. Amir's story is woven into the fabric of a narrative that prioritizes closure over justice. The echoes of his coerced confession reverberate through the community, reshaping perceptions and lives. As the weight of his false confession settles in, Amir realizes that the ordeal is far from over. The fear that drove him to speak will continue to haunt him, shaping his future in ways he cannot yet comprehend. In the dim light of a cramped interrogation room, the air thick with tension, a confession is meticulously transcribed. Each word, once spoken under duress, is now transformed into a document that will dictate the fate of the accused. As the ink dries, the confession becomes a cornerstone of the legal process. Prosecutors and clerks eagerly await the document, knowing it will shape charges and testimonies, regardless of the truth behind the words. The signed confession, now a part of the official record, begins to overshadow the actual events. Investigators, once focused on the truth, now rely on the paper trail to justify their actions and decisions. In the courtroom, the confession is presented as irrefutable evidence. The judge, a stern figure with graying hair and a heavy brow, glances at the document, signaling that the case is built on this fragile foundation. As the trial unfolds, contradictions in the confession are ignored. The narrative crafted by authorities becomes the sole focus, leaving no room for doubt or inquiry into the methods used to obtain it. Witnesses are called, yet their testimonies are overshadowed by the weight of the confession. Each person involved feels the pressure to conform to the established narrative, fearing the repercussions of dissent. The prosecutor, emboldened by the signed confession, presents the case with unwavering confidence. The narrative of guilt is reinforced, while the truth remains buried beneath layers of official documentation. As the trial progresses, the defense struggles to introduce evidence that contradicts the confession. The system has become a machine, where the document's authority eclipses any pursuit of genuine justice. In the shadows of the courtroom, observers whisper about the integrity of the process. The weight of the confession creates a chilling atmosphere, where questioning authority feels like a dangerous act. Outside the courtroom, the media amplifies the narrative, framing the confession as a definitive truth. Headlines proclaim guilt, while the complexities of the case fade into obscurity, forgotten by the public. In the aftermath, the signed confession becomes a shield for the institution. Officials point to the document as evidence of their diligence, deflecting any responsibility for the flawed process that led to it. As the case concludes, the confession solidifies into a part of the public record. Its influence extends beyond the courtroom, shaping perceptions and reinforcing a narrative that many dare not challenge. With the confession now embedded in the system, the cycle continues. New cases arise, fed by the precedent set, as the institution protects itself through procedure, leaving the truth obscured. In the dim light of a crowded courtroom, the air thickens with tension as the judge presides over a case built on shaky confessions. The defendant, a middle-aged man with dark skin and a weary expression, sits hunched, his hands trembling. The audience whispers, their eyes filled with doubt, reflecting a community fractured by fear and mistrust. As false confessions multiply, the justice system becomes a stage where actors play their roles. Prosecutors, eager for a conviction, present evidence that lacks authenticity. The audience, composed of community members, watches, their faith in justice eroding with each scripted performance. In the shadows, police officers exchange knowing glances, their loyalty to the narrative overshadowing their duty to truth. They have learned that questioning the system invites scrutiny, and so they play their part in the unfolding drama, complicit in the moral decay. The defendant's family, once proud and hopeful, now bears the weight of stigma. They walk the streets with heads bowed, whispers following them like shadows. Their lives have been irrevocably altered, caught in a web of suspicion spun by the very system meant to protect them. In interrogation rooms, the cycle of coercion continues. Officers, driven by the need for results, employ tactics that blur the lines of morality. A young suspect with unkempt hair and wide eyes sits in a stark room, his fear palpable as he is pressured to confess to crimes he did not commit. As the number of coerced confessions grows, the community begins to fracture further. Friends turn against friends, neighbors become informants, and silence becomes a survival strategy. Trust erodes, and the fabric of society begins to unravel, leaving only suspicion in its wake. The legal system, once a bastion of justice, now resembles a theater of absurdity. Cases are closed with the flourish of a pen, and the truth is buried beneath layers of paperwork. The public, disillusioned, begins to question whether justice is merely a performance for the powerful. Amidst this moral collapse, the voices of dissent begin to rise. Activists and advocates, fueled by a sense of urgency, gather in public spaces, demanding accountability and transparency. Their banners wave defiantly, a stark contrast to the silence that has gripped the community. Yet, even as the call for justice grows louder, the system clings to its narratives. Officials, fearful of the repercussions of admitting error, continue to uphold the facade of certainty. The cycle of coercion and denial perpetuates, trapping the innocent in a relentless game of survival. As the community grapples with the consequences of forced confessions, the impact ripples through families, friendships, and social networks. Children hear whispered accusations, and the weight of mistrust hangs over their futures, shaping their perceptions of justice and authority. In this climate of fear, the line between right and wrong blurs. Ordinary citizens, once passive observers, become reluctant participants in a system that rewards compliance over truth. They learn to navigate a landscape where silence is safer than speaking out. As the act unfolds, the consequences of this moral collapse become increasingly evident. The community's trust in its institutions wanes, and the cycle of forced confessions continues to ensnare more victims, each one adding to the growing narrative of injustice. With the foundations of justice eroding, the question remains, how long can a society sustain itself on lies? As the curtain rises on the next act, the consequences of this performance will demand to be confronted, and the search for truth will intensify. As the last echoes of the gavel fade, the wrongfully accused step into a world that has already judged them. The prison gates swing open, but freedom feels like a mirage, tainted by the weight of falsehoods. For many, the end of a sentence does not mean the end of suffering. Communities remember accusations long after the truth has been obscured, and the stigma of guilt lingers like a shadow. The records remain, locked in bureaucratic vaults where the ink of coerced confessions stains reputations. Officials rarely acknowledge mistakes, fearing the collapse of the fragile narrative they've constructed. Restored freedom does not equate to restored lives. The wrongfully accused find themselves navigating a landscape marred by distrust, where every interaction is tinged with the past's bitterness. Families of the wrongfully accused grapple with the fallout, facing isolation and shame. The emotional scars run deep as loved ones struggle to reconcile their loyalty to the truth with the community's perception. Even when the truth surfaces, it arrives too late. The damage is done, and the institutions that perpetuated the lies remain intact, often more concerned with preserving their authority than seeking justice. The legacy of forced confessions is a cycle of silence and complicity. Those who have suffered are often left to navigate their pain alone, while the system continues to operate without remorse. As the years pass, the wrongfully accused often find themselves haunted by the specter of their past. The struggle for recognition and restitution becomes a lifelong battle against a system that prefers to forget. In many cases, the institutions involved will only issue quiet apologies, wrapped in procedural language, failing to address the human cost of their actions. The language of bureaucracy becomes a shield. Communities that once thrived in trust now grapple with suspicion as the fallout of false confessions creates rifts. The very fabric of society begins to unravel as fear takes root in everyday interactions. The journey to reclaim dignity is fraught with obstacles. The wrongfully accused often find themselves fighting not just for acknowledgement, but for the right to exist without the burden of their past. As they seek to rebuild their lives, the wrongfully accused become advocates for change, sharing their stories to shed light on the injustices of coerced confessions, hoping to prevent others from suffering similar fates. The scars of forced confessions may fade, but the lessons endure. The struggle is not just for individual redemption, but for a collective awareness that challenges the very foundations of authority. Throughout history, the specter of forced confessions has loomed large, from the Spanish Inquisition to modern wrongful convictions. Each era reveals a chilling truth. When fear reigns, institutions are tempted to sacrifice accuracy for the illusion of certainty. In the 20th century, totalitarian regimes exploited this mechanism, using confessions as propaganda tools. The chilling efficiency of secret police transformed dissent into a crime, with the accused becoming mere pawns in a larger narrative. The legacy of these practices extends beyond individual cases. Entire communities bear the scars of false confessions as families are torn apart and trust in institutions erodes, leaving a lasting impact on societal fabric. In recent decades, wrongful convictions have come to light, revealing the devastating consequences of coerced confessions. Innocent lives disrupted, careers ruined, and reputations shattered, all under the weight of fabricated truths. The psychological toll on those coerced into confessing is profound. Many struggle with guilt and shame, haunted by the weight of words they never truly meant, while society grapples with the implications of these manufactured narratives. As the public becomes aware of these injustices, a call for accountability grows louder. Activists and advocates push for reforms, demanding transparency and the protection of the innocent from the machinery of coercion. Yet the shadow of forced confessions lingers. Institutions often resist change, fearing that admitting past mistakes might unravel the very foundations of their authority and legitimacy. The struggle for justice is not just about correcting wrongs. It's about reshaping a culture that has long accepted confessions as proof. This shift is essential to ensure that truth remains in the hands of the people. Educational initiatives arise, teaching the importance of skepticism and the need for evidence. Young minds are encouraged to question authority and to recognize the dangers of accepting narratives without scrutiny. As societies confront their histories, the lessons learned from forced confessions become part of a broader narrative. They serve as reminders that justice must be rooted in truth, not in the expediency of closure. The legacy of forced confessions is a stark reminder of the fragility of justice. It underscores the necessity of vigilance against the allure of certainty that can lead to the manipulation of truth. Ultimately, the fight against the culture of forced confessions is a collective responsibility. It demands a commitment to uphold the integrity of justice, ensuring that truth is not owned, but shared by all. As we move forward, let us remember that the strongest safeguard against the manipulation of truth lies not in technology or law alone, but in a society that values uncertainty and demands evidence.